First, I'll make some introductions about Mike Jones. He is currently the captain at the Benton County Sheriff's Office since 2007. He supervises officers in the Patrol Field Division, including the Crime Suppression Unit. 8 years Army National Guard, Rogers Police Department, 26 years and retired there, including Chief of Police for 7 years. Graduate of the FBI Academy. Experience in the schools about how to deal with gangs and other crimes. Resource Officer Program, DARE program in Rogers Schools. And if you gentlemen want to include more of what I missed when you talk, that's fine. He's got a number of awards. 2-time Officer of the Year, Rogers Police Department, and Leadership Award, Rogers Police Department. Governor Huckabee appointed him to the Drug and Alcohol Commission, and there's more. About Kelly Cradduck. Currently volunteer as an officer with the Centerton Police Department, and also works as Leadership Development Facilitator with Helmrich and Payne. He was 16 years in the Rogers Police Department, 3 years experience, undercover detective, 19th Judicial Task Force, also a school resource officer, 2 years on SWAT, 4 years in the Army, combat medical specialist, and more experience with gang education, gang suppression. Also Officer of the Year 2 times, Rogers Police Department, and Officer of the Year by Benton County Law Enforcement, and a number more awards, and they both have fine personal qualifications as well. So I'm proud to introduce both Kelly Cradduck and Mike Jones, and we'll start asking you questions. What I thought was we'd ask you a question and give you each 90 seconds to answer. If you take shorter than that, that's great, and I'll give you a little signal when I'll blow the horn when your time's up. Okay, thank you. First question, I'll start with an easy one. What is the largest budget you've ever been in charge of? Kelly Cradduck, go ahead first, and Mike goes second.
Multi-million-dollar budget with the Drug Task Force when we had to, when I was assigned to the Drug Task Force and actually supervised the drug unit, as well as the Rogers Community Support Board as well when I was active with that group. So writing grants, administrating those grants, as well as the Genesis program, which is a program that I started for at-risk youth, which was also done with grants. So worked with multi-million-dollar budgets through grants, through community support, sitting on different boards, and particularly working with the drug grant.
As Chief of Police, I administered a multi-million-dollar grant in Rogers. I wrote the grant for the 19th Judicial District Drug Task Force and administered that budget while I was the Chief of Police also. I currently work for the Sheriff's Department and have some responsibility in a $17 million a year budget, and I look forward to continuing to work for the Sheriff's Department and continuing to work with that budget.
Thank you. How do you respond to domestic violence calls? Mike, you can go first on this one.
Domestic violence calls are something that's very, very important to our organization, that we see so much domestic abuse in our county. It is mandatory that our officers respond to each domestic abuse call, take appropriate action, understand the law itself on time restraints, and it's something that we continue to educate our deputies on continuing ed in domestic violence.
Well, we've come a long ways in our domestic abuse laws from the law enforcement officers in here can remember where if the victim wasn't going to cooperate, then there was nothing we could do about it. So we've kind of come full circle where now if there's enough evidence that there's been abuse happened, then you don't have to have that victim's cooperation, which in turn then allows to take that abuser out of the situation, out of the house, so it makes it safer. You can imagine the fear of retaliation for reporting somebody for domestic abuse, and it's a recurring crime. We're no strangers to domestic abuse in our area, but what I would like to see is a task force that focuses strictly on domestic abuse calls and how we can use, for instance, CompStat to see, are we having them in certain areas, are we have them in certain time frames, are there certain things that we can do as a predictor of crime, particularly with domestic abuse. So I think that education is key. We don't get a lot of specialized training in domestic abuse, And educating officers is one of the most important things that you can possibly do. And I have been involved actively in the community well before I decided to run for sheriff in teaching free women's self-defense classes. I've done that for 16 years. It is it's important to me that we empower our ladies that they can fight back, they know it's okay to fight back, and make sure that they have the skills to fight back.
Thank you. What will you do if you have to choose between statutory obedience and constitutional adherence? For example, after Hurricane Katrina, officers were told to take guns away from law-abiding citizens. And who's first on that? Okay.
You're asking me what I would do if I would be ordered to take guns away from law-abiding citizens?
Well, and in any situation when you have to choose between statutory obedience and constitutional adherence.
Constitutional adherence is what I would adhere to. As sheriff, you have broad powers, particularly when the federal government comes in. I mean, you have a lot of leeway to protect your citizens, and no, I would not allow that to happen where the federal government come in and start stripping our citizens of their constitutional rights.
Again, it'd be constitutional. I don't believe that the federal government should come in and take over and take firearms away from individuals that have the right to possess those firearms and to carry those firearms and legally carry those firearms. The federal government does play an important role in some of these large scale, like Hurricane Katrina, but as a sheriff, I'm going to take care of the people within my county.
It's kind of unheard of that we're getting answers within the allotted time frame. Isn't it kind of nice? Good job, guys. Okay, question about your leadership experience. What is your leadership experience? How many law enforcement personnel have you ever supervised?
I began my career as a patrol officer and didn't have any supervisory responsibilities. I was quickly promoted to sergeant over the detectives and ended up supervising about 10 investigators. As chief of police at Rogers, I had 125 total employees, civilians, and certified law enforcement officers. Under the state where I worked for 8 years, I supervised myself, and now as the Sheriff's Department, I supervise approximately 80 employees. I attended the FBI Academy. It's a very important part of my background that the FBI Academy gave me the training to lead. I've continued my education in supervision, and I think I've been very successful in supervising all of the individuals that I have under my command.
Obviously, I started my career out in law enforcement as a patrol officer as well, and I also had military experience where I supervised soldiers, being a specialist, before I actually got into police work, and was a combat medic in 1989 during Operation Just Cause. Then got into police work and in patrol as well, and usually your first assignment as a supervisor is in patrol, where I supervised patrol shifts, and then was also supervising the gang unit and crime suppression unit as well. Now, I also have experience in supervising the undercover narcotics or drug unit at Rogers, and I got a unique perspective now in the civilian world, and I teach leadership development classes to multi-million-dollar companies across the United States, which has given me a good perspective on best practices in leadership. Many of the things that we do in leadership in law enforcement is completely backwards. So it gives a fresh perspective on how to do things a little bit differently and be more efficient in law enforcement. Because right now, what you see is that Benton County, especially in law enforcement, we're backwards. We are leading in areas that we shouldn't, and we are last in areas that we shouldn't be. And for instance is lawsuits. Talk about leadership. We lead the state in lawsuits coming out of that jail. You could take almost every other county in the Arkansas Counties Association, combine their lawsuits, and we still rival that number. That's not leadership. That's not positive influence.
I was thinking of a follow-up question to that. Why do you think that I know that our system in Benton County is 3 colds and a hot. That's what, we don't do the hot meals, we don't do the frills, all that stuff. Do you think that's a reason why? Or do you have some response to that? And Mike, if you want to respond to that also, you can.
Okay.
One of the reasons, the biggest reasons why we lead the state in lawsuits is because we are one of the only states that I know of, if not the only one, that doesn't have inmate account systems. Even Sheriff Joe Arpaio, the toughest sheriff in America, has inmate account systems. And what that allows them to do is when they start an account system as an inmate, then they're not automatically considered to be indigent when they come into the jail. We're the only jail in the state. When you come in there, you're automatically considered indigent. So therefore, we pay for everything they do, whether they can afford it or not. 60% of them go to sick call Monday, Wednesday, Friday, which is an abuse. So you're talking about $471,000 for inmate supplies and these medical visits and prescription drugs. When we start an inmate account system, we don't have to pay for that anymore. But we're the only ones who don't do that. Even Joe Arpaio does that. It also, so you know, just so you citizens know, that we have been sued so much out of that jail that our liability insurance has gone up hundreds of thousands of dollars just because of the lawsuits coming out of that jail. The county's liability insurance has gone up because of that. So that's part of the reason why we just refuse to be the only ones who will come up to standard and start inmate account systems.
The jail was set up under a previous administration, and the Sheriff Ferguson continued the tough stand that we're going to have cold meals and we're not going to have any frills. I know that in staff meetings that I attend regularly, that this has been discussed and it's been recommended. And I'm going to say that I've spoken with other sheriffs across the state, and those sheriffs will tell you, we believe that if you will put this commissary in, it will reduce your liability, it will reduce your complaints, and it will also help offset some of the expense. I know that in the past several months that the current sheriff and the commander of the jail has been interviewing these commissaries, and I believe in the very near future that that will be in place in Benton County. I have personally recommended that the commissary be put into our Benton County jail, and I hope that in the near future that it will be there.
Might be able to respond to that again or not? This was first brought up at the Republican meeting that the Siloam Springs women put on a forum last month. As a matter of fact, I had people here, and thank goodness we videotaped it. Mike's been there 6 years. 6 years to have that kind of influence that you could put in a commissary. It's brought up in the paper 3 days after I bring it up at this forum. They've had plenty of time to make sure that commissary could save money and be implemented quite easily. There are 2 different companies that could service that county, Tiger and Aramark. And all you have to do is give them a place to work. You don't even have to use your personnel to staff it. But yet we have not done that until it's brought up by the opponent during a campaign season. Leadership is out front leading. It's not continuing to follow. Leadership is having those ideas and having the ability inside that building to implement those things. And either one or 2 things has happened. The influence is not there, or the current sheriff disagrees with what your plan or implementation would be and just simply hasn't done it.
Thank you. Well, I wish I had the total influence over our current sheriff, but I don't. He and I disagree on a number of things, but I can tell you that once our sheriff digs his feet in, he's going to do what he believes is right for Benton County and the operation of Benton County Jail. This was occurring way before the last forum. Now, unfortunately, my opponent doesn't have that privilege of sitting in on the staff meetings and hearing what is taking place, but I can tell you, if once Sheriff Ferguson makes up his mind, Mike Jones is not going to change his mind.
Changing subject a little bit, if Benton County becomes a wet county, how will this aspect change the way operations occur now? Mike, couple of you first.
I don't believe it will change the operations of the Sheriff's Department if the county goes wet. I worked for the State Alcohol Beverage Control for 8 years, and I've heard the argument there will be more DWIs, there will be more domestic abuse, and I've listened to all of these arguments. There have been studies across the nation that shows that DWIs do not increase. Certain calls for service may increase, but I think it's important that the voters of Benton County make that determination and it be put on the ballot for the voters of Benton County to determine should we stay dry or should we become wet.
Obviously, we do serve the voters of Benton County, and I do particularly believe personally it should be on the ballot. As far as will it increase crime, nobody knows that right now. I don't think that, I mean, is it going to be more accessible? Sure, but we're the wettest county, I think, probably in the wettest dry county in the state. So it is still accessible. I still think it comes down to a personal choice, to parental involvement, to how well our schools are enacting anti-drug programs, and I think that there's some things that we could do to offset some of that. I don't think that it would change it drastically. I do think there might be some opportunities for us to benefit from it financially, and if that's the case and the voters decide that, then that's what should happen.
Written for the perspective of What do you currently do to curtail drugs or drug activity in Benton County? And for your perspective, Kelly, in the past or your plans for the future, and both of you can speak to your plans for the future as well, for Sheriff, for curtailing drugs and drug activity in Benton County.
In the 1990s, I took on the task of writing a grant that formed the 19th Judicial District Drug Task Force that covered Benton and Carroll County. At that time, I went to the large departments, some of the smaller departments that had manpower, and asked them if they would participate in the drug task force. Under their restrictions, because of manpower, they were not able to place individuals in the drug task force, but Rogers had 2 investigators assigned and was very active and successful in working narcotics cases. We become involved with the FBI, the DEA, and the 4th Judicial District Drug Task Force in Washington County. That drug task force, after I left the Rogers Police Department, was dissolved sometime and never was taken back into an organization. The Benton County Sheriff's Department has a number of narcotics investigators assigned to narcotics, and along with our crime suppression unit that does drug interdiction and organized criminal activity. We're very aggressive on our drug investigation. We're very successful in the prosecution of drug violators in Benton County, and we have a wonderful working relationship with the other agencies within Benton, Carroll, Madison, and Washington County. We're going to continue to work hard to not eliminate, but to make it very difficult for individuals to operate within our county.
I started and dedicated my entire career to fighting drugs and also gangs as well. And when I got into patrol, immediately became a DARE officer, which I taught thousands of 5th graders the DARE program, also Smart Choices, Better Chances as well. I became actively involved in patrol and made enough drug arrests in patrol that I was promoted into undercover narcotics, where I also excelled and became a meth lab investigator and eventually supervised that group. Long before I ever decided to run for sheriff, those were things that were important to me. And I have several certifications, special certifications through the state to teach law enforcement classes, methamphetamine lab booby trap classes to firemen and to investigators, all kinds of classes I've taught for years about drugs and gangs. And so this is not something I have done just the last few years. I have dedicated my entire career to it. And I have said repeatedly that one of the things that we need to do moving forward as a county, as a region, is that we have to have a regional intelligence database. I've been saying it for the last 2 campaigns, that sheriff's office is the best source of information that we can have inside of that jail. Information comes in, We should house it, and we should be able to share it. No more, the bad guys don't care about city limits. We have to work together regionally to make sure that we are keeping everybody in Benton County as safe as we can. Now, just recently, again, at that meeting in Siloam Springs, I said, we need a jail unit for intelligence for gangs. A couple of days later, now they're coming out in the jail with applications for gang unit jail investigators. Once again, I'm leading the way in how we can deal with gangs and drugs and violence. And we can sure get there if we work it together.
Next question, a gentleman, Mr. Reno, wrote it out, so it's a little bit long, so it might help you to see it. There's 2 copies there, Mike. You can pass one down to Kelly. Question is, an act was passed to allow the Arkansas Crime Information Center to give information to constables who have met certain requirements by law. Training, uniform, unit markings. To get this information during traffic stops, we have to use our cell phones or the county radios, which are regulated by the county sheriff. 5 of the constables running are Republicans and certified by law, but are not allowed to use the county radios, if for nothing else, officer safety. Question: what are your feelings toward constables as elected, trained law enforcement officers using the county radios?
I know Sam is in the room, and there's several constables in the room, and there's been an upheaval about what to do about them and the redistricting. Let me say this. The constables that are elected, we need to respect that. They're constitutionally elected officers. If they are out and they are trained and they're following guidelines and rules and policies, it is foolish for us not to allow them to use those radios. It's putting them in harm's way. And if we don't allow them to use those radios and something happens to them and they die trying to save someone, trying to prevent crime, trying to help anybody, you or your family, we've done a complete disservice to our entire community. We have got to allow them at least that much to where they are allowed on traffic stops, or when they need to, they have access to backup and help. We cannot allow them to go out and have the authority to enforce law without the ability to have that backup that every law enforcement officer in the entire United States is accustomed to and afforded. So regardless of what anybody thinks about the position, and when they're elected and they're out here and they're the only thing that stands between you and someone hurting you or your family, we need to respect that, and we need to make sure that they have access to be as safe as they possibly can. And working together, this is another one of those issues where this doesn't have to be divisive. We can absolutely work together. The constables want to work. They want to do a good job. We have to have a sheriff that embraces that, so we're all on the same page with training, so we're all on the same page with communication, and so we're all doing what we can to get along. The days of just my way or the highway should be gone. We are too big now. We're too big now of a county not to take advantage of every resource that we possibly can.
I know Sam Reyna, and I know Sam is who was a part-time deputy and done a good job with the Sheriff's Department. Sam and I had a conversation not too long ago on Valentine's Day. He was buying flowers for his wife, and I was buying flowers for my wife. And he stopped me there in the Harps and asked me what I thought about constables. I will say this, that I'm glad that there's a redistricting. I'm glad that we've reduced the townships, and I hope that by reducing it, it will find qualified individuals out there that will run for that office and be respective of the state law that is established for training, for uniforms. Not too long ago, I received a call from a father who was very upset, and he wanted to know who the officer was that stopped his son on 62 Highway. So I did a little research, and I visited with Sam about this, and I told him, I said, you know, there's nothing on the radio log where this individual called in this traffic stop. And there's the individual's in cut-off jeans. So Sam and I discussed it and come to the conclusion it was probably a individual out there that was a constable that wasn't following the laws. But back to the point, Sam and any other constable that's elected and are following the state law, if I was elected sheriff, I would allow access to that radio because I know that that radio makes a difference, Sam.
like would like to hear your opinion on the Oath Keepers organization.
Oath Keepers is a group that's established where your elected officials, law enforcement, when you take your oath that you swear that you will stand by the Constitution, you'll stand by and not allow citizens to be taken advantage of by the federal government and their constitutional rights stripped. I am and have been a member of Oath Keepers and believe in that system and will continue to be.
Well, I'm not that familiar with it, but I do believe that you have to abide by the Constitution, and that I would be supportive of that organization and what it stands for.
We're doing pretty well on time, so if there's a couple more questions out there that you want to pass up, then please do. Recently, a Siloam Springs area college student was on holiday break when he was killed in his own home by an armed suicidal subject. At the time of the killing, the subject, who lived within 1 mile of the victim, was being sought by the Benton County Sheriff's Office. Once the Sheriff's Office was initially notified of the armed missing subject and his threats, what was done, or what should have been done, to locate the subject and to protect or warn the residents in the area of the possible presence of this dangerous individual?
I'm very familiar with that case. I attended that young man's funeral, and it tore at me for days and still does. I know that when the deputies got the call that night, they responded and had this information, that this individual had been distraught lately because of finances, had made the comment to a family member, "What would you do without me?" and walked out the back door. Now, this is the information that they received initially. We had deputies in the area with night vision equipment, thermal imaging equipment. They used that equipment in the area that this individual had walked to, and the family directed them to an area around the Siloam Springs Lake, and said if any place else he would go, he would take trails toward Oklahoma. The deputies remained out there, remained in contact with the family, and they were acting on that information. Now, in hindsight, we can sit here and we can second guess those deputies that were out there all night, and we can say that we should have gone to every home out there and knocked on the door to make notification. We can also say we could use the 911 reverse BC alert to make notification. But the deputies had a limited amount of information. They done what they believe they should do at that time, and unfortunately, that individual got into a residence not too far, about a mile away, and took this young man's life before he took his own life. My heart goes out to that family. I sat there in that church and I second guessed everything that was done. But when I go back and talk to those deputies, I know that what they had in front of them, and I know that they took the action that they believed they should take at that time.
Yes, for those of you that are familiar with it, it was very tragic. But the bottom line is that the county's reverse 911 system should have been used. It's not good enough to blame the deputies for all of that. That's a leadership issue. You can't get up in front of the TV and newspaper and radio and take credit for everything good that comes out of that department, and then when mistakes are made, shuck that responsibility. If you're a leader, when those mistakes happen, you stand up, you step up, and you take responsibility for a lack of action that quite possibly could have saved someone's life. Was it a mistake? A horrible mistake. Was it deputies' fault? I don't believe that. Did leadership fail them? Absolutely, to a certain degree, leadership failed them. And we have to have some leadership that stands up and says, the great things, that's great, but when things go wrong, that needs to fall on leadership's shoulders. And right now, we don't have that. And that's a perfect example of how we just don't have it.
What is the reverse 911 thing? How does it work? What does it do?
Whoever can answer that, that'd be fine.
The county judge is sitting right here.
I have a question too. Reverse 911 is a call system that you sign up for, and it's called BC Alert. That's not Bob Kleinert, that's Benton County. But you can go online, bcalert.com, and you can sign up for multiple phone calls that you can receive for just about anything that possibly could happen in this county. Tornado, windstorm, hailstorm, flood, 911 emergency, anything. So it is a reverse 911. They will, if you have a landline, you will automatically be called. If there's a tornado, that's the only automatic call that comes in. The rest of them you have to sign up for. So does that answer your question? I don't know who asked it. Rebecca? I have a question.
Judge, you didn't write it down, so I don't think we can do this.
Oh, it's an easy question. All of you know that I'm have been interested in using compressed natural gas for our vehicles in Benton County, the state of Arkansas, the whole United States. I think it's a national security issue. If you're elected, would you be open to, if we can find a vehicle, right now Dodge Chargers don't work. That's right. If we can find a vehicle that could be converted to compressed natural gas fuel, would you be open to consideration of using that fuel?
Yes, sir. The compressed natural gas is absolutely something that we're going to have to look at as a county, and we're going to progressively need to go forward and integrate some of our cars yearly as we move on, and hopefully have a fleet of those in 10 years. It saves a ton of money. The cars and the technology now is much different than what you could compare it to 10 years ago. And the problem would be filling stations, if I'm not mistaken, Judge. The filling stations are the bigger issue instead of the actually technology for the CNG conversions. So as we get money and as we can invest in filling stations across the county, because that would be the issue, then absolutely we need to do CNG. And I would challenge you this. Those of you that may be skeptical about it, do some research on it and look at the difference it made with the Kansas City Police Department. Look how much money that they saved and some of these bigger departments have saved by converting to CNG. The budget, the fuel budget for the county sheriff's office eats that budget alive as a county as a whole. We have got to do something rather than nothing. And guys, we're going to have to learn how to do more with less. And CNG is one of those things that will allow us to do more with less. So I'm asking you now, not just the sheriff's candidates. I know Mike will get up and support it too now. But I'm going to tell you, I'm asking for voters, for people here. You all need to actually support that when it comes up because it is going to save us some money.
Well, I don't know that I'll say that I support it just because my opponent says, but what I would say is that the research we have done is not positive for the conversion. I think in the near future, that is a possibility. The Dodge Chargers that we use currently as patrol cars does not have that conversion kit. So those vehicles will be in our fleet for a number, 4 or 5 more years, depending on who's elected, I guess. But Judge, I would consider it, but I would want much more investigation and research done before I'd ever commit.
Okay, I guess we do need to wrap it up here, and we'll ask one final question. And this, I saved this one for last so you could kind of tell us some overarching things that you want us to know about you. What do you believe qualifies you best to be sheriff? And there's another one too. Tell us your top qualification and explain why.
I think what qualifies me is my people skills. I am people-centered, as evidenced by my 6 Officer of the Year awards or Supervisor of the Year awards that were voted on by my peers. And one thing that I would like to focus on and use those skills to concentrate on is our retention rate. In the last 3 years, 98 people out of that building have either been fired or quit. We are too shy of 100 people in the last 3 years that have quit or been fired. Either our hiring process is completely flawed or people are quitting people inside of that building. And that costs us an astronomical amount of money. Because if you take a look at it, how much it costs to train them, outfit them, field training officers, the equipment, and the knowledge they gain over time that you can't replace just by someone quitting and then hiring a new officer. The cohesion starts to suffer. Younger departments, lack of experience, more frequent complaints, those are things that will suffer at that department. And if you took 25% of a deputy's salary and his benefits, which is an industry standard, over a year's time is what you would lose. 25% of their income plus their benefits over a year at Benton County is going to be about $37,000 that you're going to lose if he goes off and he's poached by another department. If you took that with a captain, around 14 years, you're losing about $20,000. And you simply just can't replace his experience and tribal knowledge and the things that you have to learn on the job as a police officer. So something's going on at that department where you have almost 100 people in 3 years that are leaving that department to go somewhere else, and recently 2 left to go to Pea Ridge Police Department. That county should be somewhere where people want to go work, not want to leave. People quit people, and we need to figure out what the problem is so we can kind of turn that valve off and save our most precious resource and stop bleeding it out the door, which is our personnel.
If I could interrupt, I wanted to give him a little extra time on this last question, and that was 2 minutes, so 2 minutes sounds good, so go ahead.
I understand the importance of retention of good employees, but I also know that in any jail in the state of Arkansas, that administrator will tell you there's a high turnover in the jails. It's a thankless job to work back there in the jail with 400 or 500 inmates. I believe that what we should have is progressive discipline. We're an at-will. Every county in the state of Arkansas is at-will. As the chief of police at Rogers, we had the Civil Service Commission that gave us certain steps on disciplinary and on termination. We're not going to have that at Benton County because that's set up by state law, and the county sheriffs lost that years and years ago. But I think what you can do is adopt a progressive discipline policy within your organization. You can retain those people. You can take corrective steps when they make a mistake, and you can retain those people through that progressive discipline. You know, it's the jail. I want to go back to the jail. We should have exit interviews. Why are you leaving? Well, I can tell you, you know, when they come to you and they say, I'm just not cut out for this. I'm just not cut out. I went through the interview process. I thought I could do it. I can't do it. I cannot deal with those individuals day in and day out. So it's a difficult job, but I think that with good leadership, I've been a chief of police. You can go back and look at the retention at the Rogers Police Department. I retained Kelly for a period of time, so I will say that I know how to lead people. I have proven leadership at Rogers. I have proven leadership at the Benton County Sheriff's Department, and I believe with the passion that I have to continue that, we will be a much better department, much more efficient department in years to come.
Let's give them both a hand. And just to draw your attention, I know they both put brochures on the tables. If you didn't get information about the candidates, ask them, or here's some up here. Be sure and get information about them, and I would encourage everybody to get behind a candidate, choose somebody to support, and I know they would welcome your support with their campaigning and everything they need.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, folks.